wild, wild west, like nobody knew what they were doing. I was talking to lots of other friends in the industry. I got involved with shop.org really early on, and that was all about just sharing notes with each other because we didn't know what we were doing. We're figuring it out on the fly.
Welcome to the EVOLVE Voices podcast, a platform to hear the fascinating stories behind the people that power global commerce. I'm Edilsa, a brand advisor, and your US host of EVOLVE Voices. On to today's story. We dive into ex-Nike and total ops whiz, Kevin Ertell. His career began at a place close to his heart as a lifelong musician, Tower Records, where he built one of the first ever e-commerce sites. He'd go on to lead transformation efforts at global giants. Think Nike, Sur La Table, driving digital change and operations innovation. Along the way, he did face pivotal challenges, including navigating a devastating layoff. But as he often says, the best opportunities, they often emerge from life's toughest transitions. Today, as the founder of Mistere Advisory, Kevin helps businesses bridge that gap between strategy and execution in retail operations. And now also an author, he is working on a book focused on executing strategies. Because great ideas, they're nothing without results. Kevin, I'm so glad to have you here today. You just mentioned you're doing a kitchen reno, which means you're back to where it all began for you, Cleveland.
That's
What
right.
does it feel like returning to your roots?
It's so fantastic to be back in Cleveland. It's obviously great to be around family.
Yeah.
But Cleveland's an unbelievable city that I don't think people, know. It's like a sleeper, so much culture here. The second largest theater district in the country is here in Cleveland.
I'm not gonna lie,
Yeah.
I'm shocked. Yeah.
Yeah, we usually are, but Old Broadway is a bigger theater district, or the Cleveland Orchestra is a top 5 orchestra in the world, I think.
Yeah.
And then, of course, there's the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame.
Rock and Roll Hall of Fame is huge, and you're a bass player, so it makes sense
I
that
am.
you would love to do that. What was the first moment when you felt like, "Oh, I'm back in Cleveland?"
It was probably really around family, to be honest, being around my cousins and all the little cousins, the younger ones, and being here for the holidays was fantastic. So it was cool.
Oh, that's so awesome. Do your parents still live in your childhood home?
No, sadly, my parents are passed, so but my aunt and uncle are here, and I'm very close to them. My aunt's,
That's
my aunt actually has the same birthday as me, 20 years earlier.
well, then you can celebrate. When is your birthday? Just so
It's 20, yeah. Yes, please send me presents.
And I think there's you just talked about the theater, rock and roll, but one thing that I always see, I have a lot of friends from Ohio. I don't know how I ended up with them, but they're lovely.
They're good
And
people.
there's a certain grit. You have your people there, your sports fan, your Cleveland Browns. So like you're like, how do you think the city has shaped the way you approach life and business and leadership?
I mean, that's a good question. I'm here after being gone for a long time. I had left when I was 8 years old, but always stayed connected to the city because it's just I don't know, it's just in my heart. I do think though that Cleveland, Midwest people generally are pretty nice and friendly and willing to roll up their sleeves and get stuff done, and hopefully that's a bit of my personality.
Oh, but people always, I'm originally from New York, and the big thing that I can never take off is the edge and the hustle that comes to New York. And it came from everything and how I lead life. But that's why we need all the mix of people as we go through in the workforce.
Totally. Yep.
Yeah. And sometimes life has a way of leading us back. In unexpected ways to where we are when I think of your story, there's one moment that really stands out. You're at Nike, things seem to be going well, and then unexpectedly you're laid off. And I remember similar moment. We've all been through those throughout our career. And I think what I identified reading your posts is you're lending that sympathetic ear, being that vulnerability to people that this is normal, right?
Yep.
But can you take me back to that day? What was going through your mind when you got the news?
First of all, to say it is normal, and I hate that it's normal because I think that really sucks, and I think that's a whole nother topic. Um, Yeah, it was very, unexpected, and it was very sudden, and not particularly, emotional or friendly. It just was the moment. Facts are facts. That's it. So it was hard. I mean, I've talked to people afterwards. Other people have been through it, and it's, you go through some stages of shock and and why me, and now what am I going to do, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
Um, so I went through those too. I'd say one thing that really heartened me though was when news got out about it, I got so many texts and calls from people. And those were really uplifting. And, I will use this as an opportunity to say something. Some people said, well, I didn't text for a few days because I wanted to give you space or I wanted to give you time or I wasn't sure what to say. And I will say just what I learned through that process was it was really helpful to get those texts right away. So, for anybody who's thinking, I just wanted to let you have time. Yeah, you don't have to ask for, hey, write me back or how you doing. Just say you're thinking of me or that of that person or whatever. That goes a long way. It helps a lot. So,
Is there a particular text that you remember the most that like really sat with you?
there, I don't know if there was a particular one. There was a theme from a lot of people just of, they appreciated my leadership. They appreciated I was there. They don't know why this happened, but a lot of times it was less about I don't know why this happened and that kind of stuff, and more about just people saying a lot of things that they appreciated about what I did or how I helped them, and that was pretty cool. And it probably did lead to how I feel about things now. So it was really good.
And it reminds you that the best thing you can leave people with is impact. It's like your impact on people and how you make them feel, which no one can take away from us. And
I love that.
how did you ground yourself and figure out what was next? You come out. I mean, we call it acceptance, shock, all the stages of grief, if you call it. And then all of a sudden, okay, I'm ready to go. How
Yeah.
did you ground yourself there?
So I'm always a guy who just deals with stuff and then moves forward. So I'm a little bit of that,
Yeah.
by nature. But it happened in October, November, I think November. So it was, um, right into the Christmas season. There was no job hunting at that point, anyways, because we're right in the middle of the holidays, and so that actually afforded me time to just go, well, I got time to think about what I want to do next. And that was actually nice. And as a lifelong retailer to have time during Christmas, and during all that time, it was kind of amazing. Like my son and I went to a movie on Black Friday. So that was pretty great.
That's amazing. He must have been like so glad to have you here.
It was nice. It was nice. So but that gave me time to think about what mattered to me and what I wanted to do going forward, and I had always said to my wife for years, like, hey, when I retire, I'd love to just like consult and coach and do stuff like that and kind of pay some stuff forward. And so she said, why don't you do it now? And I was like, well, I don't know. I mean, maybe I have one more in me. Maybe I'll keep exploring, but I had time to keep thinking about it. And the more I thought about it, the more appealing it was to just start do my own thing and be able to go and kind of offer maybe all this stuff I had learned over the years and the decades of doing things, and see if I could help people and companies in a broader spectrum than just sort of take it to one company. And that's how I ultimately decided to go that route.
That's amazing. It sounded like one of the people you talked to was your wife, right? So
Yeah.
I remember as I was thinking of what my next moves were in the past few years, people were who I first started with, and that was my first action point. Was that your first? Like, let me take up some calls and just
Oh, yeah.
bounce ideas off of people.
Yeah, I mean, that's a great point. I talked to my wife, but I talked to tons of friends. I had lots of time for networking, and I scheduled lots of calls and got lots of advice from people. People who were doing, kind of what I was talking about, consulting and coaching, people who were still in the corporate world, just sort of asking them about where they were headed. It was amazing, really, how many people or were and are so gracious with their time and advice and offers to help. That was cool, and I certainly will always pay that kind of stuff forward as well.
Uh, I didn't end up going to a career coach because I just ended up having such a wealth of advice from people and then I was doing all these analysis of like, what am I good at? Where is my superpower? And like, what can I really
Mm.
index on? Um, uh, but was people like your main hub to figure out the next move, or were there any other tactics or tools that you used to like figure out what was next?
Um, so as people, I actually, as part of the layoff too, Nike gave us this executive outplacement service. So,
Amazing.
um, so that was good. I had a coach through that, and she was awesome, super helpful, and really she mostly just asked me questions and got me focused, and that was really good. But there was also the ability to work with a group of, other people in the same situation, so that was nice. So that was talking to people I didn't know, but were in different industries and sort of different situations, and so it was a pleasure to kind of talk to all those folks and get their opinions. Um, I met some people through that. One person I met was Somer Hackley, who's an executive recruiter, and she had presented to this group, because she's written this book called Search in Plain Sight, which, by the way, I highly recommend. Phenomenal book for
Great.
anybody who's looking for work or even looking to hire people. She kind of gives you this peek inside the executive search behind the curtains, I guess, a little bit. And it's written in such a really easy to consume way. It has so many tips that she was massively helpful. So she presented to our group. I listened to her there. I read her book, and then I actually scheduled time with her and talked to her and got even more information from her.
Wasn't it easy to schedule time? Like,
Yeah, she's phenomenal. She's amazing. So I told her I saw her there. Probably helps if I told her I read her book.
yeah, all the
But
time.
no, but she's amazing, and also someone who went on her own. So she, used to work at big executive recruiting firms and decided to start her own executive recruiting firm, by herself to begin with. And so she was really helpful in a lot of the thinking that she went through too. So, you know, like-minded people is good to talk to. Like you, good to talk to you.
And always so fun. What I love to hear about it is already your joy at talking about what's next. And one of the quotes that I loved from your LinkedIn is you said, "The best opportunities often emerge from the life's toughest transitions." And I couldn't agree more. And it sounds your wife nudged you in that way. You've since joined a few advisory boards.
No.
You are started Mistere Advisory. You're writing a book. How did these shifts unfold for you? Did one naturally lead to one another, or were you consciously thinking of what's next?
It's probably a little bit of both, but I do think that sometimes, at least in my case, I was locked into a career path and that's what I was focused on. So all these other things maybe were there, but it didn't seem like something that was possible to me or that I even considered. So now all of a sudden I'm thrown in a situation where anything's possible. So, what do I want to do? And that's where some of these things came up, deciding to coach and consult was something I considered for retirement. I started to write on LinkedIn, just posts I was putting out there, and several people said, "Hey, you should write a book." And I was like, "Well, I mean, that's always one of those things that people say, well, yeah, I'll do that someday." And I kind of had said that too, but I hadn't really thought seriously about it. But now I had some time to work on it, and I started the process of doing it. And when I started to do the research and interview people for it, it was so fun. It is. I'm still working on it. It is so fun. I've really, really enjoyed it. And so that's kept me going. So I can't wait to finish it. I'm getting close and then, sort of get it out there. But I'm writing it a little bit in public too, because I've been posting excerpts and stuff as I go to kind of get feedback. So so far so good.
Yeah. Was that the most surprising out of all the transitions? Is this the one that caught you the most by surprise? It sounded like advisory was maybe something you were considering your retirement, now moved up sooner, which is always great. And then, but is the book, or is it something else that surprised you the most?
I think it's the book. Yeah, I think that was just always one of those back of my mind things that, I was just like all the other people say I'm gonna write a book. Yep, who knows? But now I'm actually doing it, and I'm positive I'm gonna finish it because 'cause I'm almost done. So it's been great.
How did you find your story? So like, I think so many people talk about there's manuscript and there's so many stories you could write. Like, how did you find it for yourself?
Well, first I had to think of my topic and what was I passionate about, and something I've always been passionate about, and I think pretty good at, is just getting stuff done, executing. And so the book is about, how to execute strategies. And, most strategies fail. There's like crazy numbers out there, like 70, 80, 90% of strategies fail. And I saw this Harvard Business Review article that really sort of gave all the stats, and the stats are astounding, that all these strategies fail. The number one reason they fail is poor execution. And they had a stat, I think it said something like, on average, companies only deliver about 63% of the financial value that they had promised with their strategy. So that leaves us huge opportunity, right? And that's something I decided to dive into, and I had my thoughts, and I wanted to write it from an operator's perspective. I'll say that I went out and looked to see, what kind of books there are on that. There, in terms of writing strategies, there's like a billion books about that. We don't need another one of those. But I didn't find that many about executing, and most of the ones I did find were written by academics and consultants.
Yep.
So I wanted to write it from the perspective of an operator, somebody who's actually done it. But I didn't want it to just be about me either. So I wanted to talk to other people, operators in different businesses, industries, with the idea that I could sort of curate the collective wisdom of 1,000 years of experience operating and actually doing it. And that's what I've done. I talked to enough people that I got well over 1,000 years of experience, and that process in itself has been amazing. But one of the things I found is, as I talked to people, there really was this common thread. It didn't matter what the industry was, like the tools and the techniques um, that are required to be successful in executing a strategy are pretty consistent across industries. So that was actually, nice to hear too, because I felt like I could write something that would be hopefully valuable and useful across the board.
I know you're going to talk about all operators, but you are a master operator. And if I was like looking at your background at Nike, you landed at an organization where you find yourself supporting 50K store employees worldwide. That's huge. Was there a specific moment when the weight of that responsibility hit you?
I don't know. It's a kind of a funny thing that you get. I don't think it did really. Weirdly, I don't know. I never really thought about it like that, but I think you get into the work that you've got going, and I'm just focused on that. I mean, certainly, traveling around the world and meeting the people in the stores and hearing their stories and understanding that definitely impacted me in terms of, hey, I got to help these people. What can we do to make their lives easier and make them more effective? But I think I would have felt the same way if it was 50 employees. It just felt like a focus on the work at hand and what we got to do versus the number of people.
That's a massive insight, Emily, because it's like what you do with 50 is the same as 50,000. It all goes back to the foundation. So when you have all these, here you have a sprawling operation, but regardless, a lot of moving parts. How do you even begin to manage that? Like, where do you start?
Um, I mean, I think you have to really focus on what is the most important objectives.
Yeah.
So what matters the most, and then try to break it down. I've always been a big fan of breaking stuff down. So figure out what the North Star is and the most important thing, then break it down into, manageable chunks, and even break it down multiple times. I love to sort of cascade things down so you really understand how the pieces add up to the whole. Um, and I guess that's just the way I
Yeah.
do it.
I love that tactic. You make it manageable. I call it Kit Kat size. All of a sudden, you get it's something that you can actually do and move on because I think that's what happens is there's a lack of bias of action,
Yep.
and so I think as you made these operational decisions, did you put other tactics in place to stay ahead, push innovation, as you went along?
Yeah. I mean, anytime we had a new problem to solve, we would look at, what's the way to do it for the future. One interesting thing about Nike, I think, the way it's organized is you have a global team, and then you have what are called geo teams, geography teams.
Mhm.
And I used to like to think about it like a sports league or something. And the global team was like the commissioner's office of the NBA, and the geographies are like the coaches of the teams. So different focus areas, and the geographies are out there trying to win a game day after day after day. So our role then as a global team, the commissioner's office, is to think about the good of the league, think about the company overall and where we're headed in the future. So we were always looking a couple of years out. Where should we be? What are the tools that we're going to need to enable, all those geos to win their games every day? So when you do that, and you know that you've got to look out 3 years in advance, then I think innovation and finding the best sort of ways to solve those problems um, is paramount, right? And so like we had a workforce management issue. We knew we needed to change our sort of scheduling programs in the stores, and we started to look at what could be, and that we got involved in AI and machine learning before Chat GPT and all that, a little before that. But AI is not new, right? It's been around a while, but we definitely wanted to make sure that we had something that was more automated, less manual, because what we found through a number of things we did, backing up a second, one of the big tools we did is we put out store reporting tool, right? Which sounds so boring and lame, right? But what we knew is that store managers were dealing with more than 80 reports that they were processing every day, every week, to figure out what their business was. And we found through going out and seeing them that they were taking on average of 7 hours a week rather, to compile all that info into like Excel spreadsheets, right? So we said, well, we could solve that by giving them the metrics they need the most and put it on their phone. So, use the technology that we have. All of a sudden they had stuff instantly. And those 7 hours, instead of sitting in the back office working on Excel, were spent out on the sales floor with customers or, with the team. And when we first started to test that, we found that stores that had it were way outperforming stores that weren't, like after they got it. And the store managers attributed that to being out on the floor. So then we started to look for what are the other things that are holding the store managers in the back, and what else could we do? And so like workforce management was a good example of that. And if we could automate that and save a lot of the time they're doing in the back of house and put them on the floor, then that was going to be a big win. So we started to look for innovative technology there.
It might sound simple to people, but that in and of itself always such a roadblock at even been at Fortune 500 companies where you're shocked that everything's working out of Excel. And to just that's hey, I was just like, are we still here? Okay. But then doing these things like putting simplifying these metrics, and then taking the action of putting it where people are, their phone. Those are the things that drive adoption, which the execution happens, which I love. And I think another place where you were that I found interesting is you managed a lot of amazing things, but sometimes you meet with tough feedback right along the way. And as I was reading through some of your experiences, the relaunch of Borders.com was reading, and one journalist said it may be too little, too late. How did you handle that and align the team to move forward in those cases when you're pushing maybe something new that may have resistance from others?
Well, that one's an interesting one because when I first got to Borders.com was actually on Amazon. I don't know if you remember those days where some brands were that. And so Borders.com was literally the Borders logo on the Amazon site. And they had originally had a Borders.com site that wasn't performing well. And so the executive team just punted it to Amazon. I think Bezos came in and made a pitch, and we're talking about like 99, 2000 or something, so early in those days. And so now they had Borders.com out there, but it was generating revenue, profit, because there was really no cost to it. It was just getting a commission. But it was missing opportunities. When I started at Borders, the first thing I did was lead the team that built the Borders Rewards loyalty program. So, we built this loyalty program, but it didn't work on Borders.com because Borders.com was Amazon. So, we had this big, important initiative and really vehicle to drive the company's business and growth, but it didn't work in this major channel that was growing really, really, really quickly. So, we talked to the board about it. The contract with Amazon was ending, and we built a new Borders.com that I think, it was doing really well. The first year up, it was outperforming the Amazon version of it, I think by 60 some percent. But maybe to a journalist's point, the whole company was in a lot of trouble. The company had a massive amount of debt. And in my experience, a huge amount of debt is an albatross. It's hard to maneuver when you have that kind of debt. And ultimately, the company struggled, and I left before the company was totally out of business. But, we did what we could, but it was definitely a tough macro situation.
And employees can feel that macro situation when it's happening. How do you keep the morale up for the team? You talk so much about leadership, right? What is the kind of leadership that's needed in those times?
I think it's about focusing on what the broader mission is. It's meaningful, and to me, that's always the customer. How do we? Let's talk about what we can do to deliver for the customer. I think you get this is actually I'll go way back. This is a lesson I learned a long time ago when I started in retail because I started, on the sales floor at Tower Records, right? So I was just a sales clerk. Um, but something I learned there was that, when you're in the front lines of retail, you're there because you're passionate about the customer often and you want to help customers and you meet these people a lot. At least I was. And so I cared about the customer in front of me a whole lot more than I cared about whatever the corporate objectives were.
Right.
And so I've always carried that with me. And I think that's always been something to talk about within a company is like, hey, the work we're doing has a purpose, and that purpose is ultimately to do, this thing for customers that will make their lives easier or more enjoyable. And so I always like to focus on that because I think we can get united and we can all agree on, hey, what are we doing to help these other people, these customers, and feel good about that.
Yeah. And I think part of it is as a leader, you can step in and build a morale and help know that, hey, at the end of the day, what we're fighting for as a customer, let's do the models you talk about is 3 C's, which I love, this character, critical thinking, and chemistry. When did that first come about? And how did you employ it?
First of all, let me say how impressed I am with your research. Um, y- I've thought about that a lot over the years. And there was a time, it was a tower. We were hiring for a leader of the team. A manager of the team had left, and I was hiring a new leader of that team. And rather than just go out and hire, I decided to start something that I've done ever since, which was ask the team, what do you need a leader? And what happened when I talked to them about that was they didn't say we need someone with such and such skill set, expertise in this case was e-commerce. Uh, they listed a bunch of leadership they listed things that were leaders, people leaders. And so that changed my complete mindset on how I wanted to go about and hire for that role. We brought a guy in who was a great people leader, and he made a huge difference on the team, and he delivered results because he was a leader, a people leader. And I sort of always thought about those kind of things going on, or what are the characteristics of someone who's going to be a great member of our team? And it's always less about their experience and their skills in the function. And in my experience, has always been about those three things, like character, number one. Is this a person who is willing to work with others well, is low ego, high curiosity? Um, critical thinking, I think, is another big deal. Are they going to be able to look at problems that they encounter and think about them in a well-rounded way to come up with positive solutions? That matters more than anything because you can have all sorts of past experience, but the future isn't the past. You're gonna have to forge your way through something you haven't encountered before. So how are you thinking about it? And then chemistry, is huge. We started this discussion a little bit about you need all types. We need New York and we need Midwest kind of thing. But I think that's so important as you're never just hiring for the role, you're hiring for the team, you know? And so it's so important to figure out what does a team need? And maybe that's a personality type, maybe that's an experience set, maybe it's a skills, it depends on where the team is at. But I think I've had the best success when I think about how it all is going to come together so to take the team to the next level. How does that make sense?
No, it does. At Amazon, we obviously had our leadership principles, and we spent a lot of time evaluating against those. Was there an evaluation process for you? Were there questions that you had that, like, this is a good question to have that I would measure chemistry or I would measure character along the way?
I mean, we had, at different companies I've been at, there's been sort of the HR driven, here's the questions you have to answer kind of
Yeah.
thing. So we had those. Um, I don't know if maybe there are questions. I thinking off the top of my head, but I always thought about those topics and then I would write out questions. So I don't know that I had always a go-to, but I would think it over in the moment.
That if not mistaken, I might get this timing right, so you correct me. But
Okay.
around the time of maybe ending towers, beginning borders, you had your son. And I always wonder, how did you handle that? How did you stay present as you were a newborn baby, a challenging job? Would love to hear about that.
Well, I had two kids too. I had my daughter first, so
Okay.
daughter and son. It's one thing I've always done is prioritize dinner time. I always try to do that. Like, um, we're gonna all four, well, they're babies then, but just, always try to find that time every day when the family was together. Um, and family was always the most important thing. And I don't know, man, when those kids are born, at least in my case, everything changed. All of a sudden there is this little being that I'm responsible for that I have this level of unconditional love that there's just nothing like it, and that they were my number one priority immediately. Everything else was secondary to that. I had the career in order to support them and help them have a successful life, and that's always sort of been my priority. Now they're in college, so it's different, but
So, but it helps that you are so good at execution, because that would mean that you need to be very, very good at prioritizing your time and to be able to be okay. We're cutting down. I'm dipping out for dinner. This is when it starts, and you just have to be so much more efficient at that time, which I'm sure was helpful along the way.
I had never thought of it that way, but it's a good point. Yeah, yeah. I mean, you definitely pick your priorities, and
Yeah,
and
yeah.
definitely.
I think another launch that I was really interested in, because you were at the what you called the genesis of the e-commerce area, is when you launched towerrecords.com. And now we're seeing this AI shift, right? And another new transformative time in digital happened. But what was it like to navigate that early digital transformation, especially for a brand that at that point was really strong brick and mortar roots?
Yeah. Well, I mean, first of all, it was the wild, wild west. Like nobody knew what they were doing. I was talking to lots of other friends in the industry. I got involved with shop.org really early on, and that was all about just sharing notes with each other because we didn't know what we were doing. We're figuring it out on the fly. And if you go even back to then, I mean, like, people were mostly accessing the site via a modem, and yet they leave, and yet,
Times.
well, AOL, yeah, I mean, Tower had an AOL store before the actual website, but still, it was all modems, and the problems you were dealing with then was like, we can't have an image that's too big, or it'll take people too long to download the page. So just very different times. Um, so that was one side of it, and the other side was for sure the stores did not love it. They felt threatened by the website. And, luckily I came from the stores, so I could speak the language of the stores and hopefully try to help people understand why this could be beneficial for everybody. I don't know that I was always successful in that, but one thing I would always try to point out is like, look, the website is a brand vehicle for us all the time, 24/7 in all sorts of places. Where we don't have stores, it's an opportunity to reach more people with Tower. Ultimately, hopefully, it connects people's stores as long before there was any sort of omnichannel or anything like that. So, but I tried to involve people from the stores into the site. Like we had this thing called, if you like, I can't remember what we called it. If you like this, you'll like that, or something like that. But it was, content that we had put together to help people understand, because this would happen all the time. People would walk into a store and say, I like, Madonna, what new would I like, or something. And then you would, give them some recommendations. So I would bring the store people to the site in that sense and have them write content and kind of have their face shown. And it would always say what store they were from and that kind of thing. So that was a way to sort of try to cross promote it and have people feel like, hey, we're part of one family. Although I can't say that was perfect by any means.
Yeah. It sounded like your toolkit was one, you were a store clerk before. And so you were able to speak in their language, understand their experience. It sounded like you also involved them in the process. Was there anything else to get them familiar to digital? I mean, it's uncomfortable. Was there any like training courses that needed to be done? Education?
There probably was. I mean, we didn't really train people on digital or e-commerce as we mostly called it back then. We just talked about it where we could. And who knows how successful we were ultimately. I think some people definitely got on board, but there were old timers who definitely did not. Uh,
Yeah, I mean, what advice would you like now learning that experience where you were introducing new technology, more than a new ecosystem, right? A new way of thinking. And then now you're facing this same now with AI and now it's agentic, it's generative, all these different buzzwords. What advice would you give today to brands now navigating a similar shift that you wish you'd known earlier?
yeah, I mean, I think going back, um, I definitely could have communicated more with the stores. I could have spent more time showing them how this could be beneficial to them, and gone out in person. I think another thing I probably would do in retrospect was find some advocates in the store, so it wasn't just me who had interest in this, but finding other managers out there maybe who could talk about the benefits of it and help people see it. I think there's, advocates throughout an organization are always helpful. I think in terms of I mean, I'm very passionate about where AI can take things, and I think it's an absolute. I don't think game changer is says enough of what it is and ultimately can do. I think for AI though, there is a lot of muddying the waters because everybody is AI this, AI that, and it's while there may be components of AI and all these things, I think it's definitely helpful for people in organizations to play with it and understand how it actually works, and then start to think about how you could apply it. Generative AI, is ChatGPT, that sort of thing. And I think it can be tremendously helpful in retail on a number of fronts. I just on LinkedIn this week, I published something I just messed around with, but I thought about training, store associates, which is it's a very tedious process that gets outdated the minute you send the training out. The way we've been doing it for decades. But AI now gives you this ability with generative AI to essentially be a personal tutor for every single person. People learn differently. We all learn differently. So I made this little tool. I call it a sales coach, and it's a musical instrument sales coach. Um, but what it does is you can go into it and type in an instrument, Gibson Les Paul, and it will give you the top 3 sales factors for that item, so you know what's important to talk to customers about. And then it gives you an option to say, do you want to ask more about it? You can just ask it anything, and it'll tell you more information. And then it says, would you like to role play? And you say, sure, I like to role play. Then it asks you 4 different persona types. I think serious musician, casual musician, beginner, and I forget the other one, parent or something like that. And then you can role play with that, and then it evaluates what you just did and tells you how you did, right? I mean, that's like very individualized capability that can go to every single employee and be available for every product you have. And I created this GPT in 30 minutes with no coding. You could do this kind of stuff. So like when you go in and learn how to play with it and try to play with this stuff, it's unbelievable what you
You
can
hit
do.
the nail on the head, which I feel like has been where adoption happens. Play with it.
Yeah,
You know,
play with it.
like you need to have fun with the technology. And I think that's what Chat GPT has done on steroids. It's
Mm,
AI metaverse where all these nebulous terms 3 years ago, and all of a sudden you had Chat GPT
right.
and you were having fun with it.
Yeah.
And it's feeding it. Yeah, it's a friend. It's your co-pilot. It's your thought partner along the way. And I think that's so much of what's missing in the adoption is the fun part. And
Yeah.
how do we make it fun instead of something that's a barrier to entry or something? This is just fun. Why don't you try it? Do you like it? Okay, great. Let's do more with it. Um, And it totally changes the narrative. And that's what I felt like ChatGPT is just one part of AI. But what made AI so fun for people and common in what people talk about. And so I love that you're doing that. I can't wait to try it as soon as I get off this call. Um, and as you go through it, what, as you think of yourself as an operator, how do you operationalize AI? So it's hard. You're balancing, think of Nike. You have a huge organization. How do you plug it in? And how do you make it, is it being part of the roadmap? What are the ways to influence?
I think, again, it starts with what problems are we trying to solve, and what could AI solve? I think you have to have a purpose for it. Like, you can't just say, "Hey, we should do more with AI." But if you understand what it is, if you understand that, generative AI, for example, is, it's a friend or colleague that you could have with you that knows everything there is to know in the world and can do things really, really fast. What problems could that solve for you? The training is one example, but there's other things like what do you do every day that's really, really tedious? Maybe it's you have somebody who's just writing copy for product and it's just a super tedious job. AI can do that instantly, and it can do it way better, and it can do it at a much higher level of scale. Now it's scary for people, right? Because like, well, my job is that. What's gonna be my job? But I think then you have to start to think about, well, if you're spending tons of time on something that's really tedious, and you didn't have to do that, what could you do with that time? And then it starts to unlock things. It's almost like what we talked about earlier. Like, well, I got laid off, and now what am I gonna do? Well, all of a sudden, windows open because I have time. And so if you start to think about that, and this has been history, of technology. I mean, it's given people more time more than anything. If you look back in history, um, tech has mostly given us more time. And what have we done with that more time? We've done more, creative things, more highly cognitive things. We're working our way up Maslow's hierarchy of needs. But if you think about it in terms of a business, there's it removes a lot of obstacles that have held businesses back from doing more creative, more innovation, taking things to the next level. So if you think about it there, how can you unleash people to do, more of that type of stuff? That's a way to start to think about it. Yeah, even the sales training, right? Like, okay,
Right.
we got all these people writing sales training. We've got staff who are taking sales training and going through some, it's taken a very long time and it's mostly boring because it's stuff they already know or they don't need to know. Well, if you condense that down so now they're getting what they need to know in the moment they need to know it, then it goes back to they're on the sales floor more now and they're on the sales floor better educated to talk to consumers. So you can carry it, kind of all the way forward.
Yep, yep. It's that part of what it opens you up. I love that you said tech gives you back more time to do the things you love. And I think for me on my day to day, the simplicity of like Otter AI, instead of me having to transcribe the call, it's transcribed for me. Is there any other tool? I know you're advisor for Parla, but any other tool that you've like has made your life easier, given you back more time?
Um, well, on the AI tools, ChatGPT for sure.
Yeah, I mean,
Um, as I've been researching this book, the two I've been using a lot for research are Perplexity, which has been amazing because I could go in and I'm interested in this topic and it just finds me stuff instead of me having to do multiple Google searches. And then Google's Notebook LM is freaking mind blowing. Have you played with this?
no, 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 I haven't. Yeah.
So you can. I'm still learning it all, but you can just load all sorts of stuff in there. Academic articles, research, whatever. You can just load all sorts of stuff into it. And it comes back and gives you a study guide, for example. It gives you FAQs that you can easily ask about. But then the most mind blowing thing it does is it creates a podcast on that material to help you learn. And it's a AI man and woman voice who sound incredibly natural. And they're having a conversation about this topic, which makes it so much more accessible. I've loaded in for my book. There's parts in there where I've got like psychological stuff or neuroscience or behavioral science and some kind of heady stuff. And reading these articles is painful. It's really hard. But all of a sudden I've got this chatty, you know, this two chatty personalities talking about it, and I'm like learning stuff. It's making it so much easier to take it in. So that's a great one.
OM? Google.
It's Google. It's Google's product is called Notebook LM.
Okay. That is fun. It's to your point. It's like making something tedious not so tedious, which is fun. Another thing I found interesting about your time as we talked about your career, Tower Records, is one thing that I was passionate about is finding a lot of jobs where I was actually passionate about things. And Tower Records, it's a powerful way where work intersect your passion. And as I was reading through, doing my research, you're a bass player since you were a teenager. And I'll have to be honest, I am the worst at music. I am the most top 40 pop person, like Google. And so as I was looking through your list, what I was loving is the variety. Pop, there's funk, there's jazz in there, which I went to New Orleans last year and just fell in love with it, Jean-Baptiste and everything. So yeah, talk to me about your top, like your music inspiration and how you go about it.
Well, I worked at Tower for a long time, and you get exposed to everything. I'd say when I started at Tower, I was a metalhead.
Really?
I had hair, like long hair, and that was all I was into. But when I was working at Tower, everybody gets a chance at the time to put music on in the store, so people would put on different music, and I'm just getting exposed to all sorts of different music by doing that. And that's when I started to realize there's this whole world of stuff out there. Um, and ever since then, my music tastes are all over the board because it's I think it's the same theme, like locked into one view. That's all I'm looking at, and all of a sudden something happens that causes me to see the rest of the world, and it opens up all sorts of things. And music, I am extremely passionate about music. Like I am a musician, but I have music on all the time, at home, and I make playlists all the time on Spotify, and I'm a kind of a lunatic about it all. And I think you saw every year there's a few of us that trade our top 10 albums of the year.
Right.
A lot of ex Tower people, so it's always fun to do that every year.
Talking about it's like, but you were lover of music working where they loved music. So that how was that when you were there?
I mean, it was amazing. I was around my people, and constantly everybody's talking music all the time. I absolutely love it. I'll say I've been very lucky in my career that most of the companies I worked at have been areas I'm passionate about. Out at Tower, I love music. I love to read. Borders was great too. I'm reading books all the time, and there I was surrounded by books. Got to meet a bunch of authors, all that kind of stuff. I also love to cook. I worked for Sur La Table for 4.5 years, and that was amazing. And I got to be such a better cook there, from being around people who had all these skills. Our head chef for the company was, worked right there, and he had a test kitchen. I learned a lot from him, and got my kitchen is stocked with way better equipment after after my time there. And then I'm huge into sports, and I'm huge into working out and playing sports, and so being at Nike was another passion area. So yeah, I've been very lucky to be around my passions in my career all the time. Pretty cool.
It makes your job easier from day to day. I would say burnout comes from when you're misaligned, and so when you get to do research on the things you love, and it happens to be work, there can't be anything more magical. As you
Pretty
describe
great.
it. I'm gonna end with a question that you actually threw to your son. So you guys were talking about you had a picture of VCR, and he said that those were tapes. Um, and so as you go through it, the question that you posed to him was like, what's the weird technology that you're going to be telling your kids in 20 or 30 years? Is it people charging things that's going to be weird? Is it not the driving cars and not driverless cars? What will innovation look like in 2050? Like, what would you say is going to be the weird thing?
The weird thing now that people won't know, yeah, because that was what I asked him. Like when you're 40 or something, what are you going to look back and tell your kids about? I think there are things that are very commonplace now that won't be then. Some that are easy to picture, like cash. It's almost gone now, but I think that will be weird to people. That we have cash. I think I think keyboards will also be weird. Yeah, because there's no way we're still going to be typing stuff into a computer 20 years from now. So I think those are some of the things. It's hard to even imagine where AI is going to take things, where the things that we do today. I think so much of what we do today that's tedious will be shocking to people 20 years from now that we were doing. You know, it is hard to fathom, really, because just a quick AI fact that I think was interesting that I heard a couple of weeks ago was that Moore's law, that computing power doubles every 18 months. That's been true for computers since the 50s. We've seen that over and over and over. And the math on that is that after 5 years, you're like 10 to 12x what you were 5 years previously, which is a lot, right? But AI is currently doubling every 3 months, not 18 months, 3 months. And if you do the math on that, it gets nutty, because the math on that after 5 years is that it would be a million times more powerful than it is now. So if that holds true, it's going to be crazy. It will, there's no question we'll have robots, around. Have you ever seen the movie WALL-E?
Oh, I for sure have. Yes.
Yeah. I think WALL-E might be our future, hopefully not that we've destroyed the planet. We're living on spaceships, but it might be. But, there's in that movie, there's like all the people are just getting carried around and robots are bringing them milkshakes and stuff like that. I'm pretty sure that's going to happen.
I mean, and I still am shocked that we end up having to do this whole thing at dinner to split the bill. I'm like, this should not be a thing anymore, right? There's so much technology anymore. So I always think about dinner and how
Yeah.
different that experience is going to be in
Like
our
it.
future. But it's fun, and especially as I look back 20 years ago at, like, my first tape was Selena. I am Dominican, so the team, so that was a huge part of my life. And I mean, that became extinct within a year of me having it. So it's crazy how quickly technology moves, and how fun is it to think of what lies ahead.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
Kevin, this has been so much fun. Just so much fun. As I think through others who are listening, they'll want to find you. Where can they find you?
So my website for the business is mistereadvisory.com. So MISTERE advisory. You can also remember that for what it actually was. I made it sound fancy in French, but really it's Mr. E.
Mr. E. That's so punny.
It was stupid. It makes me laugh. But that's it, mistereadvisory.com. Yeah, definitely come there, connect with me. I'd love to connect with anybody and then keep making the world a better place.
Yeah, let's evolve together. You have yourself a great day. Excited to see you on the other side.
Yes, you too.
Now make sure you subscribe to Evolve Voices, this leading and incredible project where our ambassadors are interviewing amazing professionals from all over the world so they can share their perspective and benefit you with their perspective, their knowledge, and you can understand what's happening in the different markets. Evolve Voices is a project part of the Evolve Commerce Club, the #1 and leading community where we connect international professionals in the world of commerce. We are now connecting professionals in more than 40 markets, and every week we invite an expert to share their perspective and their knowledge. So if you'd like to know more, you can always look at the comments. We have a link there so you can request your application, and stay tuned for the next episode. Thanks for watching. All the best. Ciao.